Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. This is episode 46 of the Feeling Good podcast, and we have a subject here that is dear to my heart, that David has been pushing back for a while, but I wanted to squeeze that in. And so by way of introduction, what I'd like to do is there was a study done in 2012 by Dr. Joan Luby, and that showed that nurturing a child early in life may help him or her develop a larger hippocampus. And that's the brain region that's important for learning, memory, and for stress response.
That's the University of Hippo?
That's right, yeah. The hippocampus. So it seems to demonstrate.
There's other studies on children too, where even failure to thrive, physical difficulties when children don't receive nurturing.
And there's a very famous study on adverse childhood experiences that show that in later in life it leads to more mental diseases, more poverty, less success in school or in work and so on. So the nurturing of a young human being, and maybe we can extrapolate to adults too, seems to be a vital need. And but at the same time, I know that when you work with some of your patients who are looking for love, love, appreciation, approval, you actually look for distortions in their thinking. So how can you harmonize those two things?
Right. When I was first learning cognitive therapy back in the 1970s, I would go to this weekly seminar that Dr. Beck had and present cases, and we were developing and learning cognitive therapy. And I remember one day in a seminar, we were talking about some patient who was very depressed because she'd gotten divorced or some such thing, was suicidal and feeling like, if without love, life was not worth living. The conviction she couldn't be happy or fulfilled without love. And this is a kind of common belief in our culture that, Barbara Streisand sings, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world, that love is an adult human need, and love is all you need, and this type of thing. And then Doctor, and most of us have just kind of accept that. And then Dr. Beck made the announcement, or he mentioned that love is not an adult human need. And during the seminar, and when he said that, I thought, my gosh, this guy must be some kind of a sociopath or something like that. Yeah. That he's not, doesn't think that love is an adult human need. But I decided to do some experiments to check it out, first in my own personal life, and then I began working with patients around this notion. And I had that belief that so many of my patients have, that if you're alone, somehow life is going to be, less fulfilling and less rewarding. Yeah. And so I had to go to Las Vegas for a conference, and it was my psychopharmacology days, and I was supposed to be at some table and talk about antidepressants or something. And then at the end of the day, one of the drug reps who had a exhibit table next to mine said, "Some of us were going to go out to dinner. Would you like to join us?" And then I thought, well, I told him, I'm actually have some plans, but thanks. But actually, I had no plans. But what I decided to do was to do an experiment to spend the evening alone.
Yeah.
And to see, if it would be really, kind of miserable as I anticipated. And I also used my pleasure predicting sheet, kind of predicting how enjoyable each thing would be. And so I got all dressed up just as if I was going to go, out with some folks. And all my expenses were reimbursed, so I said, well, I'll just go to some fancy restaurant because I'm going to get reimbursement for it. And so I got into a taxi, and I said, take me to one of the fanciest restaurants here in Las Vegas. So I said, I don't know the different restaurants, but whatever you think is something super. So he took me to this place, and then I walked up to the maitre d' and said, I'm looking for a table for one, but I'd like to have one of your very best tables.
Yeah.
And so he gave me this very beautiful table, and I had this meal, and I was just shocked that it was just very rewarding. I couldn't believe it. And then after dinner, I got in another taxi and I went to some kind of nightclub or show that was going on there, and it was incredible. Like it was like 99 or 100% enjoyable, and that didn't jive with what my expectations were. And then I got to thinking, well, it's probably because I wasn't alone long enough, and that if you're alone for a long period of time, then eventually, it's going to become annoying or miserable or something.
Well, there's that TV series called Alone.
Yeah, Alone. That's one of my favorite shows, and starts again tonight. The fourth series. Okay. Yeah. That's a great show. If any of the listeners are interested,
and people who've watched it can see that some contestants are able to sustain themselves, but the one thing that they just stop being able to deal with is the aloneness.
Yeah, so for a few of them it is. For most of them it actually isn't. But they're out against, it's really hunger and practical things that do most of them in on that show. A few of them it's loneliness that causes them to give up, but actually not for most of them. So then I did another experiment, and my wife had to go to California to be with her mother, who had cancer, and took the kids for a month. And I thought, well, I have to see my patients, but I won't accept any social engagements on the evenings or weekends. I'll spend all of my time alone, and I'm sure eventually it'll become unpleasant.
Yeah.
And then the same darn thing happened. I when I was alone, it was fantastic. And I thought, one day I thought, gosh, I'd kind of like to learn about the theory of relativity. So I went and bought a book on Einstein's theory of relativity, and I was reading it. And then, I used to collect coins one Saturday. I thought, I'd love to go up to New York, take the train to New York and just go through all the coin stores and just doing stuff I really wanted to do. And the longer I was alone, the happier I became. And it really kind of exploded or imploded this belief that I have that somehow...
Did you get divorced?
No, because you don't lose the enjoyment of other people. You just overcome this idea that I have to be loved in order to feel happy and fulfilled. And once I saw that, in a way, Beck was really, really right in what he was saying, then I began to use this with great benefit with my clinical work, because I wrote this book, Intimate Connections, which is about shy, lonely people and how to improve your love life and things like that. And in the first part of that book, one of the requirements is, before I'll give you the secrets of dating, you've got to overcome your fear of being alone. And so there's a lot of techniques in the first section of the book, about how to become happy when you're alone, because I found that the people who were single, 60% of my patients in my clinical practice were single. They were divorced and couldn't get into the dating scene, or they'd never gotten married in the first place. And I found that the ones who felt they needed somebody to feel happy and fulfilled always got rejected. Because the person who does the chasing, you see, if you feel you need someone or you need love, you're going to chase that person.
Yeah.
And then they have all the power, and the probability is very high that you'll get rejected. And so this became a very helpful tool in my clinical practice. Just give one more vignette, and then we can kind of go freestyle on this controversial topic. But just to give you an example, there was this fellow that I was treating, named call him Ron, and he was a single fellow from, and he lived in one of the outskirts of Philadelphia. And he was absolutely convinced he had to have love to feel happy and fulfilled. And so he would go out at night, going to all these singles bars, trying to pick women up and trying to find a relationship. And he would be coming on real strong and, trying to impress people, trying to get some woman to love him. And he was just constantly being rejected. And then he kind of had some, pock marks on his face, I think, from acne, and he thought maybe I have to get plastic surgery, and maybe that's the problem. And then he bought real expensive clothes, thinking he'd impress women with his clothes. He'd get a date this way. And I kept telling him that, you can be happy when you're alone, and if you'd be willing to spend a month or two alone and overcome your fear of being alone, then I'll teach you the secrets of flirting and dating. But as long as you feel you need a woman, you need love, I'm not willing to show you how to enter the dating scene, because you're not going to be successful at it. Well, he got so angry about this, this idea that I was trying to give him this preposterous belief that you don't need love, and he didn't buy it.
Yeah.
And so he finally fired me in a rage because over this issue. And I always wondered what happened to him. And then he actually contacted me, asked if he could come in for a session. 6 months later, he said he wanted to give me some follow-up. And that, he says, after he fired me, he kept going to singles bars for another few weeks and got shot down about 10 more times. And then he said, well, maybe I should see if what Dr. Burns said was true. And he had remembered that he had always loved photography. So on weekends, instead of going out trying to meet and pick up women, he decided to go out and start photographing flowers and things out in the woods and the mountains. And it was the days where you could develop your own photos. He developed a little dark room in his house. Right. And he said, he was using this pleasure predicting sheet. How satisfying is it going to be to, drive to the mountains, to photograph some flowers, to develop them? And he said it blew his mind. He suddenly realized he was having 100% satisfaction ratings doing this. And it dawned on him like a light bulb that he really did not need love to feel totally happy and fulfilled. And just like when I made that discovery, it just came as a shock to his system. When it came into my mind, what happened to me is I discovered you're never alone. You're always with yourself. And I found out David's a good guy to hang out with. I kind of like being with myself.
Yeah, right.
So he made that same discovery, and he just gave up on the idea that he had to, chase women to find fulfillment. And then he said the oddest thing happened. He was out on a Saturday morning taking photos, and then he went to this cafe he used to like to go to for lunch or late breakfast after he'd been shooting photos. And he noticed. Did I tell you this story already on the podcast, or?
I don't recall.
Oh, okay, good. There was this hot babe in there, and he thought she was kind of giving him the eye. And so he just ignored her, and he kept doing, what he was doing, eating his food there. And then she came over and said, "Would you mind if I join you for a couple of minutes?" And this just shocked him, and he says, "Well, sure, yeah, no problem." And then she started talking to him, say, "Oh, are you a photographer? Because I see all your cameras and everything." And he said, "Well, I'm kind of a amateur photographer. I'm a local school teacher. But I do a lot of photography on weekends."
Yeah.
And then she said, "Oh, do you ever do like glamour photography or nude photography?"
Oh, yeah, you've talked about this. I remember. Yeah.
On the podcast?
I don't know if it was on the podcast.
Well, I hope not, because I'll sound pretty senile. We'll both seem pretty senile. But he says, well, no, I don't usually, but I could. Look, why do you ask? And she said, well, when I was a little girl, I walked past this garage where there were these mechanics working, and they had one of these pinups on the wall.
Pinup calendars, yeah.
Yeah, and when I saw that, she said, I got all excited. And I've always had the fantasy of
you just didn't know at the time when
being a pinup girl, and maybe you could kind of take photos like that of me. Would you be willing? And he said, well, sure, no problem. And when would you like to do that? She said, well, how about right now, today? So they went over to his apartment, and she started disrobing and doing these sexy photos, and they both got really excited. It ended up, making love.
Yeah.
And then they had a lot in common, and he'd been going with this woman for about 3 months, and they were engaged and just happy as can be. So he said, I just wanted to come back for one last session and tell you, doctor, you were right and I was wrong. And it was just so much fun to see that follow up. So that's one way to look at this.
Yeah. And surely you're not suggesting that single people should not go out and date.
Well, if you're having trouble in the dating scene and you're kind of desperate and find that you're the one who's chasing all the time,
yeah,
and getting rejected, then it could in fact be a good idea maybe to pick up a copy of my book, Intimate Connections, and overcome your fear of being alone.
Uh-huh.
Because then when you go back into the dating scene, you're not trying to get something from the other person that you can't give yourself. You know how to give yourself happiness and joy and fulfillment. And so then you can be focused more on the other person, what you can give them and how you can relate to them, rather than having them give you something that only you can give yourself.
Yeah. Now you've talked about adult relationships and adult seeking for love, but what would you say about children, especially younger children?
I don't have any expertise in it, so I try to limit my comments to things that I have knowledge about. And since I've been in adult shrink and haven't treated kids or haven't looked at the literature, I just can't make any intelligent comments there. So
really, a distinction needs to be made here when you make the assertion you don't need love. That only applies to mature adults. People who. Yeah,
I'm talking about adults. I did tell you the story of a man who said that he was happy all the time.
No.
Well, it has to do.
Was that you?
No. But I was on this AM Philadelphia TV show talking about my book, Feeling Good.
Yeah.
And they had call-ins, and someone called in and said, Dr. Mertz, is it possible to be happy all the time? And I said, I don't think so. I don't think it's even a good idea. But I've never heard of someone who's happy every minute of every day for their entire life.
Yeah.
If anyone has ever heard of such a person, have them give me a call.
I know some people. I'll have them give you a call.
Yeah, good. So as I was leaving the show to go home, the producer said, there's a phone call for you here. And I said, hello, and she said, this fellow said, is this Dr. Burns? I said, yes. He says, well, I'm the man you've been looking for. I've been happy every minute of my life since my earliest childhood memory.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to meet with me, I'd be happy to tell you the secret. And I said, yes, I'd love to meet with you. I've never heard of such a thing. So this fellow came by my office, and it kind of ties in with this childhood nurturing thing that you mentioned. He said that when he was a little boy, like maybe 4 or 5 years old, his parents were both killed in the same week. I don't know if it was murdered or an accident or something like that. And so he said that he was sent off to live with his grandparents who lived on a farm outside of Philadelphia. And so he said when he got there, his grandfather told him, listen, this is a farm, and we all have to work all the time, and we don't have time for love and for things like that. And so you're not going to get, any love here. But we'll take care of you and we'll feed you and everything like this. But he says, I'll give you this one bit of advice. He said, don't ever let anyone put you down. And as long as you follow that advice, you'll be fine. And he said, I've always followed that advice, and I've been happy every minute of my life. And he said, I've had cancer 3 times, and I've defeated it. My partner in business betrayed me and absconded with the funds. The business went bankrupt. You can give me any kind of bad news you want, and I'll just be happy as can be. Uh-huh. So that was the story. And here was somebody who didn't have any nurturing. But I think if we're talking about a little child, an infant, I think that's where the lack of nurturing can probably be causing some damage, biologically as well as psychologically.
Yeah, it changes in the brain. Yeah.
But I don't know. Isn't that interesting?
Well, it is interesting. So,
by the way, I'm not advocating being happy all the time. I think sometimes tears can be really beautiful, and one of the most important experiences. And vulnerability and sadness is a way we can get close to people. I wouldn't want to be happy all the time myself.
Yeah, no, you want to be able to empathize with other
suffering
human people. Human beings.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that answers my question.
I thought you were going to be hard on me, Fabrice.
No. I think that once you make the distinction between adults and children, that suddenly makes all the difference.
Well, and another distinction is the difference between wanting need and wanting love and needing love. And you see, like in my Tuesday group at Stanford with my family, we have very loving, supportive environment, which is joy. But once you go from I value love and I want to give love, I want to receive love, to I need it, that's when you set yourself up for heartbreak, for depression, for loneliness, for anxiety, and sometimes even for suicide.
Well, I think that points to something larger when you believe that you need anything. I think the word need is fraught.
That's right.
It makes us believe that we'll be incomplete, or we can't survive without something, whether it be love or something else.
Yeah, and that's the basis of an awful lot of depression and anxiety. And we see those messages in our culture. You need to be one of the beautiful people to be happy. You need to have all of this money. You need to have all of this success. You have to be so smart. You have to have this. You have to have that. And then most of us, when we look at ourselves, we're not the beautiful people. When I was in 4th grade, I was really kind of sad because Halloween was coming up, and I wasn't invited to any Halloween parties. And so I figured I'm kind of one of the outsiders, one of the unpopular kids. And so I think my older sister or somebody said, well, why don't you have a Halloween party? And so I thought, hey, that's a good idea. And so the next day when I went to school, I stood up and announced, because Halloween was just like 4 days away. I said, if there's any of you who haven't been invited to a Halloween party yet, you can come to my Halloween party. So I didn't know if anyone would show up. And then the oddest thing was almost every kid in the class came to the Halloween party. It was such an eye-opener.
Oh, that's great.
We had a wonderful time.
Well, I'm thinking of Mick Jagger, who says, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you might just get what you need.
Yeah, right.
All right, well, that will do it for today. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Fabrice.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donzel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.